Chapter 9. Have you seen him before? The policeman knelt in front of Kenny. It put the policeman directly at eye level. Alicia couldn't help wondering if this was in a training manual or just something this officer did naturally. Kenny shook his head back and forth. Did he say anything to you? He said that he knew my mom. He asked if I had been having problems in school, and he kept asking about them. Anything else? Not really. We were doing math and the teacher asked him to help us, but he wasn't any good. It had taken over an hour before the police had even shown up at the school. The officer was middle-aged, but his chest filled out his uniform. Alicia tried to stare at his buzz cut and large ears, rather than the gun strapped around his waist. There were only a handful of people around by the time the officer had arrived. The other mother had left to go care for her children. Kenny had already grown bored and hungry and was ready to get on with his day. Alicia couldn't blame him. What use would the police be if it took them this long to start asking questions? The police officer stood up and beckoned Alicia and the principal over to the side of the office. What sort of problems has he been having at school? Alicia couldn't tell who he was addressing. The officer wasn't looking at anyone in particular, and he did not use either of their names. Alicia was about to open her mouth to say something when the principal finally spoke. Kenny is an unusual kid. Things happen around him, and we are not sure how he does them. Exactly what kind of things? The officer asked. He convinced a group of kids on the playground that a fire-breathing dragon was chasing after them. The officer just stared at the principal. He runs away from school. No one can find him, and then he sneaks back to his desk and pretends that he has been there the entire time. Is this what he has been getting in trouble for? There was another time that he caused an entire garden of plants to grow suddenly. The principal had a desperate edge to her voice, like she was begging the police officer to understand precisely how abnormal Kenny was, as she listed off all the strange happenings. He got in trouble for a fire-breathing dragon and magical growing plants. Alicia couldn't help feeling a bit vindicated. Someone else outside the school's realm also thought that they were full of wild stories. It didn't make up for them making her lose her job, but it did make her feel better. That is exactly what he has been getting in trouble for, Alicia said. The officer looked at Alicia and then at the principal. He seemed at a loss for words before he finally collected himself. Well, that is not why I'm here. Do you have any idea who this man was and why he was interested in Kenny? He asked about the occurrences. He seemed very interested. The principal's voice was so low that they could barely hear. You talked to the man? The officer asked. Yes, I walked him to the classroom, but I saw him again as he was leaving. He asked me to tell him more about what had been going on. He seemed very concerned. I just wanted what was best for Kenny. You discussed my son's educational record with a stranger? Alicia's hands were balled into fists at her side, but she kept her voice even, aware of the officer next to her. I thought he was trying to help. The principal had deflated from her usual confident self. There seems to be a lot more going on here than just a man wandering on campus. Unfortunately, I can't help with all of that, but we will increase patrols around the school and keep an eye out for anyone matching this description. If anything else happens, let us know. Thank you, Alicia said. The police officer nodded and then looked at the principal who had walked away and started talking to the staff. Good luck, the officer whispered as he left the office. Alicia took Kenny's hand and they walked out to their car, still parked in front of the school. It must have been a nightmare navigating around it for pickup. As they drove home, Alicia kept looking at every car, expecting a black SUV to start following them. Then she realized the man could just as easily be using a different car now, and she began looking at every driver as they drove past. If a vehicle followed them for too long, she made a random turn, watching to see if they followed. She knew that she was letting her anxiety take over. She also knew that she was awful at deviating from her regular driving routes. It wasn't long before she had them both hopelessly lost. She turned on her GPS and followed it all the way home. If he knew where Kenny went to school, then he probably already knew where they lived anyway. Not that the thought made her feel any better. Why is he interested in my son? Alicia thought. Why now? Her mind kept going back to her visit to the bar. She couldn't help feeling like she started something that she didn't understand. Kenny had not talked since they left the school. He walked from the car to the house and sat on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. A look of helplessness had replaced his carefree manner and cheerful grin. Alicia sat down next to him and pulled him into a hug. "None of this is your fault. I won't make you go back there until we know you're safe." "Mom?" Kenny whispered. "Yes, Kenny Bean." "There is something that I didn't say before. The man, he told me a secret and told me not to tell anyone." Alicia's breath caught. Finally, she managed to say to him in a relatively normal tone, "You know that I am the one person you can say anything to, no matter what. You can especially tell me secrets." "He told me that he was going to help me so I could learn to control everything." "I don't understand. Control what?" "All the powers, so they don't just happen. He said I could learn to make them happen." Alicia sat down next to him and wrapped her arm around him. Her son thought that he had powers. She worked on controlling her voice so that he wouldn't hear her skepticism. "How is he going to help you with your powers?" Kenny didn't speak at first. He sat staring at his hand that was rubbing against his legs. When he did speak, Alicia could barely hear him. "He said that he was going to take me to a place where there were more people like me. He told me he would take me to my dad."